Yeah, so now it's time, following on from that and the wide discussion of facts and logic and other such things, to address the fact checkers and ask ourselves, who's fact checking the fact checkers? Now, this is something
I think that would be us, actually.
at this point, us and other such people online, because the mainstream media is not going to necessarily be doing it to themselves anytime soon. So recently, in the last month, this article came out from the Daily Mail. A few outlets reported on it that the Facebook fact checkers could be
Just a little bit.
just a hint that they could be politically biased themselves, admitted by Facebook's vice president, Nick Clegg. And isn't it interesting, as Carl and I have discussed before, isn't it interesting how a high-level British politician ended up in a high-level private position within Facebook? That means that there might be a little bit of political overlap between goals going on there.
It's almost like Facebook is developing itself into some kind of multinational country, in a way.
It could be, I believe, a famous political thinker, theorist almost, from the early 20th century said that private and public becomes corporatist, which could be another word to describe fascism, but that's just an offhand remark. It doesn't mean anything. Don't worry, guys. So this article states, Facebook announced fact-checking measures in 2016 amid claims to its failure to remove misleading content helped to swing that year's US presidential election in favor of Donald Trump, because purely having Donald Trump be elected in the first place was a sin in and of itself, according to these people. And here's another question. When they brought up this claim, did anybody fact check that in the first place? Reasonably speaking, because we all remember around 2016, it's, as you said, Russian collusion. Fact checkers need to come in so that we can make sure that we're not spreading misinformation. Did anybody check in the first place that misinformation was what caused the election of Donald Trump, or just that people liked him and voted for him on the basis of his personality and policies? But that's a different question. The measures which allow users to alert Facebook to content they believe to be fake was applauded by many, but critics decried the intervention, warning Facebook would rely on left-wing fact-checkers. Since then, Facebook has been accused of suppressing legitimate stories and stifling public debate.
Because it has.
Yes, we can see there that, as always, the soothsayers were out in force with their accurate predictions.
Oh, gosh.
Facebook Vice President Nick Clegg has admitted that the company's fact-checkers employed to root out alleged fake news from its social media platforms could be biased and pursuing their own political agendas, according to a European Commission document. Under its fact-checking scheme, Facebook uses a network of 80 organisations across the world, including 3 in the UK, to flag up misinformation on its platforms. And I imagine these are probably similar networks used by other social media companies like Twitter.
Are we talking places like Hope Not Hate and that sort of thing?
And the
Anti-Defamation League.
the ADL, probably places like that, the sorts of places that still believe that this means white supremacy. Stories deemed false or misleading are not removed from the site, but flagged to users via a series of warning labels. We've all seen them. We all may have tested how far we can push those warning labels in the past. Naughty you. Facebook's sophisticated algorithms... Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, if you doubt that these exist as well, when you're in an alternative media company like we are, and you're writing articles, stories, doing segments and clips and things like that, the amount of verbal gymnastics you have to do to avoid words which are possibly, but probably, and almost certainly, but not definitely blacklisted is extremely infuriating.
And then you've got to consider, well, they may not be today, but will they next week?
Exactly.
When will these things be labelled verboten?
And this is the problem with having a set of laws that you have to live under where they don't actually tell you what the rules are. Yeah. They don't tell you there's not a published list of words that you can't say because they'll be throttled, but you know full well if you see the statistics and the analytics that something like that is happening.
And once again, you have to consider that there doesn't seem to be any true overhead on this. There is no responsibility taken for when these fact checkers end up being wrong, because these fact checkers are humans. They are fallible, and they have their own agendas to push, which they will do.
And most of the people you find in these, when you actually look into their profiles, they're not only accidentally, possibly, occasionally biased, they are deliberate propagandists.
Oh, absolutely. But yes, to carry on, Facebook's sophisticated algorithms can relegate such stories so far down the site that few people would ever see them again. So for anybody unaware, that's actually what China does.
Yep.
on their social media networks, they will not outright ban you. They will shadow ban you, so you are able to post, but no one sees it. So you think that your posts are getting out there, but just aren't getting any engagement, which is sort of a soft nudge approach, especially for a place like China, very soft touch to try and get you to just shut up and go away. The document shows that Clegg and Vera Jourova, Vice President of the European Commission, discussed how Facebook countered disinformation during the 2020 US presidential election 2 weeks earlier. I wonder which way that swung. However, the minutes said...
Was there something about a member of the Biden family and a certain dossier that got leaked around that time?
I think there might have. The New York Post may have done a small thing about that, but
interesting.
Not for us to say.
Mind,
yes.
Yeah.
Clegg's also stressed that independent fact-checkers are not necessarily objective because they have their own agenda. Former Cabinet Minister David Jones described Mr. Clegg's comments as deeply worrying. He added, the admission completely destroys the credibility of Facebook's own procedures. You destroy your credibility on the face of it. All you need to do is see it. And it's completely it is incredible.
But it's probably more obvious to people in our space than in other spaces to be a little charitable.
That is fair.
Because we are more censored. The things we are likely to talk about are more likely to be throttled.
Yes, but he continues, it offers news organisations no right of appeal when it censors them, even though it may have acted on the advice of fact-checkers who are motivated by their own agenda. Facebook said last night, Nick never suggested there is bias in our fact-checking program, even though he clearly and blatantly and explicitly did.
Yep.
But okay, Mr. Facebook spokesperson, he did describe that one benefit of having a range of independent fact-checking partners is the variety of specialisms in different countries and issued areas that they bring. Sorry, did a fact-checker write this response?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But this is exactly the kind of statement you would expect coming out of government when they do something wrong and they get caught in it. It's like, oh no, our minister absolutely did not say the thing that he said, but he did also mention this thing which is good about us. So Facebook more and more is starting to seem like a public entity,
they
like
are
a government.
They are a public forum, they are a platform, and just to examine this phenomenon is not a new one, not by any means whatsoever.
Are we going back to the 20th century?
We are going back to the 20th century, to the earliest 20th century, primarily straight after the end of the First World War, where there were certain rumblings in Austria, Germany, Bavaria, certain areas of that part of Europe, about a particular individual who was stirring up some trouble, shall we say, and how the New York Times, as exposited by this book, which I'm currently reading, The Grey Lady Winked, How the New York Times Misreporting Distortions and Fabrications Radically Alter History. Just a little bit into the first chapter, very interesting so far. A little hint that I might be doing a book club on this sometime soon.
He is doing a book club on it.
Yes, I will be doing a book club
stuff
on it. Yes, we've got to throw some shills out here and there, don't we? Sure. But talking about how in the earlier 20th century, the New York Times seemed to be prime fact checkers for anybody who might have been questioning, well, is this Hitler bloke a bit of a threat, could you suggest?
Oh, no.
For instance, there is this article from 1924 after Hitler was released by a prison, claiming that Hitler was tamed by prison. Released on parole, he is expected to return to Austria, and to get a direct quote from that issue, you can see here, his behaviour during imprisonment convinced authorities that he was no longer to be feared. It is believed that he will retire to private life and return to Austria, the country of his birth. It could almost come straight from the pages of Snopes nowadays, couldn't it? And there's an even more alarming one from 2 years before, in 1922, where the Times correspondent for Bavaria, I believe, was eager to give Hitler the benefit of the doubt. He's credibly...
That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, credited with being actuated by lofty, unselfish patriotism. The keynote of his propaganda, however, in writing and speaking, is violent anti-Semitism. But then they throw in a lovely little disclaimer after that sentence. But several reliable, well-informed sources confirmed the idea that Hitler's anti-Semitism was not so violent or genuine as it sounded, and that he was merely using anti-Semitic propaganda to catch masses of followers and keep them aroused, enthusiastic, and in line for the time when his organisation is perfected and sufficiently powerful to be employed effectively for political purposes.
That take aged well.
Yes, and what dastardly political purposes those turned out to be, with immense consequences. And that's the
New York Times genuinely, legitimately running defence for Adolf Hitler.
Yes, and then during 1939, during the German invasion of Poland, they only printed the German propaganda side of the news coverage, covering that it was Poland invading Germany on the Glitschwitz, or however you're supposed to pronounce it, incident, which viewers may be aware of. But that's just to point out that obviously the New York Times have an agenda. Everyone has an agenda. It was even written in the language that you expect to hear from fact checkers nowadays. Everyone has a perspective and can be wrong on the facts if they're not diligent enough. The problem is when an institution or news organization advertises itself as unbiased and purely factual, despite not living up to that.
So I would say that I agree everyone has a perspective. I think saying everyone has an agenda is not entirely right. I think lots of people don't have an agenda.
Perhaps
I don't consider myself to have an agenda.
Well, that's fair. Well, you could even consider just the truth as a form of an agenda, but it's a much more noble agenda than most. But then you can see other examples from much more recently. From recently, we've seen Kamala Harris, ridiculous comparison from January 6th to the same as 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. But then Snopes had something to interject here, saying that they wanted to do a little fact check for you all, saying that the claim in January 2022, Vice President Kamala Harris said that the January 6th US Capitol attack was worse than Pearl Harbor and or 9/11. Did anybody say it was worse than it? Did anybody claim that she said it was worse than it?
No, that's not what the fuss is about. The fuss is that they're being described in the same light.
Yeah, I've seen some very amusing meme edits of her comparing all three as equal severity, but I've not heard anyone saying it was worse than. But thankfully, for anybody who might have, Snopes are here to tell you that that's mostly false. What's true? Harris cited January 6, 2021 as one of 3 dates that echo throughout history. What's false? Harris did not say or imply that the attack on the US Capitol was worse than Pearl Harbor in 9/11. Well, that's great, because no one was saying that. That's what these fact checkers do. They will change the framing, deny their falsified framing, and then move on. And there is no accountability taken for this. These sorts of articles and fact checks are done specifically so that Spurgs on Twitter are able to just go, actually, it's been fact-checked. Yeah, and you can just throw this out there, whether or not that's the argument you were making in the first place. And there has been another very large-scale denial of something put out recently. If we move along, you can see that AP Fact Check has recently decided to fact check the mass formation psychosis claim that has been spreading around the internet as a result of Dr. Robert Malone's recent interview on the Joe Rogan podcast.
There are lots of words for this as well. Sometimes it's called psychic epidemic. Sometimes it's just called mass psychosis, mass formation psychosis.
Mass hysteria.
Yeah, mass hysteria.
There are many different things for it.
They broadly describe the same thing.
But you can see from this tweet that sums it up: mass formation psychosis, an unfounded theory spreading online, suggests millions of people.
An unfounded theory.
I know.
It's 100 years old.
Suggests millions of people have been hypnotized into believing mainstream ideas to combat COVID-19. Psychology experts say the concept is not supported by evidence.
It absolutely is.
Oh, excuse me there. So apologies. Let's take a dive into the article itself. Thank you for getting that up, John. The term gained attention after it was floated by Dr. Robert Malone on the Joe Rogan Experience December 31st podcast. Malone is a scientist who once researched mRNA technology, but is now a vocal skeptic of the COVID-19 vaccines that use it. I believe that what they're missing out there is that the mRNA vaccine technology is what he worked on. But psychology experts say that the concept described by Malone is not supported by evidence and is similar to theories that have long been discredited.
But is it a theory that's long discredited? No.
I don't think so. Here's a look at the facts. When you have a society that's become decoupled from each other and is free-floating anxiety in a sense that things don't make sense, we can't understand it, and then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis, they literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere, Malone said. So that's Malone's initial claim relating to mass formation psychosis, which sounds a little bit familiar.
It's a generalization, but it's fine, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty observable in the way that people have been behaving recently and have behaved for years, let's be honest. He claims such...
just look at Beatlemania, for example.
Oh, God, yeah. You can even take pop culture examples.
Right, exactly. Or K-pop, for goodness sake. There's so many things where this frame of reference can apply. Sorry.
Yeah, people literally got trampled at Rolling Stones concerts back in the day. Like, women wet themselves when the Beatles came out onto stage, to the point where they said it was running down the side aisles.
Oh my God.
I know, it's disgusting. But if you don't tell me that that's not the result of some kind of mass psychosis, then I think you're a fool. Oh, sorry. He claimed that such people will not allow the narrative to be questioned. Psychology experts say that there is no support for the psychosis theory described by Malone. To my knowledge, there's no evidence whatsoever for this concept, said J. Van Bavel, an assistant professor of psychology and neural science at New York University, who recently co-authored a book on group identities. Keep this man's name in mind when we get to the end of this segment, because it will be relevant again. Van Bavel said that he had never encountered the phrase mass formation psychosis in his years of research, nor could he find any peer-reviewed literature. The concept has no academic credibility, Stephen Riker, a social psychology professor, said, wrote in an email to the Associated Press. The term does also not appear in the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology. So all of these, it seems to be that they have very much cherry-picked their sources for who they're getting their information from. I'm not going to make the direct comparison to the New York Times coverage of Hitler, but they also seemed to be cherry-picking the sources they were getting their information from. And the thing is, Robert Malone has been very active online. He is very active online. I'd recommend you give him a follow on Getter. He's very interesting. And he has obviously picked up on people criticizing him for this, and posted this, and went on GB News recently to talk about mass formation psychosis and vaccines. We'll be focusing on the psychological aspect of what he's talking about. If you want to play a bit of this clip here, John.
From junior academics to do so. And it's not my theory. It's the theory of Professor Matthias Desmet of the University of Ghent. He's an absolutely solid academic with over 170 publications. He's come out with a book recently called The Psychology of Totalitarianism, in which he describes his mass formation theories. And they are built on a large library of over 200 years of academic research into this topic of the behavior of crowds, including by some of the people that are considered foundational in 20th century psychology, such as Hannah Arendt, a survivor of the Holocaust, in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. So this comes at us, and there are all these assertions being made by the fact checkers, as usual, that aren't actually grounded in fact, as usual. They didn't do their homework, as usual.
Oh, I do love that. He's pretty based there, isn't he? Just that he knows that they are trying to sucker you, basically. But he has the references to back it up. He talks about 200 years of psychological research going into this, but AP News said otherwise. And he's even written a Substack article on this, which we've got access to here, where I'll just read some of the interesting parts of it. Today in fact-checking, the fact-checkers, junior academics cited by Forbes, Associated Press, Reuters, and The Independent, I think it's Reuters actually, and The Independent, so this has gone well past just the AP. A number of other publications have all decided to just like fact-check him. Have just not done their homework concerning the work of Professor Dr. Matthias Desmet of the University of Ghent in Belgium. All I can say is that I hope that their naive, ignorant, grandstanding statements to the press are brought up during their future academic tenure and advancement reviews. That's pretty brutal right there. I love it. Clearly, Google was not the only corporation triggered by Joe Rogan Podcast 1757, but what absolutely has been generated by all of the co-opted reactionary press and big tech titans metaphorically tripping over their shoelaces is a massive trove of real-time data validating the brilliant mass formation intellectual synthesis developed by Professor Desmet over the last 2 years. Well, that's the thing. They don't even understand that in all behaving in the exact same way with the exact same response, they are proving his point. They're providing real empirical evidence of the hypothesis that they are putting out there. This is excellent scientific research.
No, I'd have to look at Desmet's particular formulation of this hypothesis.
Well, there is something that I'm going to go on in this article. So he talks about multiple governments have now admitted to actively using fear and mass formation related theories as a tool for totalitarian population control during this outbreak. But what confuses me is why the Western press is all following the same narratives of Forbes, which is now owned by a Chinese media holding company.
That's very
What a
interesting.
shock there, eh? I don't see.
Do they also get money from Bill Gates? Were they on the list we covered the
I
other
wouldn't
day?
be shocked, to be honest. I don't see how people could claim that mass formation doesn't exist or has never been scientifically studied. The term just refers, it goes without saying, to the process of the formation of a mass or crowd. Mass formation has been studied for over 200 years, beginning with such scholars as Gustave Le Bon, Freud, McDougall, Canetti, Hannah Arendt, etc. In the 20th century, psychologists such as Ash and Sheriff have studied mass formation experimentally.
I think Denise and Edward Bernays and Joseph Goebbels are also rather interested in this particular subject.
Goebbels might be a name coming up again, very briefly. Some of these scholars did explicitly use the term mass formation, others didn't, but what they studied was basically the same: the way in which individuals' mental states is influenced by their tendency to conform to group thinking. And once again, this is a hypothesis that has been used to explain many different atrocities, such as the atrocities of the genocide of the Kulaks and also the behavior of the German people during the Nazi regime and the Third Reich. And here is an excerpt from Professor Matthias Desmet's new book that's coming out, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, Mass Formation, a brief summary. Totalitarianism is characterized by processes of large-scale mass formation. Four conditions are needed for large-scale mass formation. A large amount of people must feel alone and isolated.
Lockdown, for example.
Yes. Their lives must feel pointless and meaningless.
Because all sources of meaning, including their job, have been taken
And
away
potentially even their business has gone out of business, has gone down as a result. There must be high levels of free-floating anxiety.
due to widespread fear messaging.
Yep. And there must be high levels of free-floating frustration and aggression caused by by all of the other things compounded. So it does sound an awful lot like the scenario that has been engineered to a certain extent by COVID responses, you could say. And then let's take a look more specifically at the AP fact check and who it was they were referencing in that. If we move along, John, we can see here the Post-Millennial have an excellent article talking about it. New York University Assistant Professor of Psychology and Neural Science, Jay Van Bavel, who co-authored a book on group identities, as brought up in that AP fact check, has made claims that the only way to fight COVID-19 is for everyone to change their behavior until such time as a vaccine can come along, and how to get everyone to change. And this is quoted from a tweet. If you want to scroll down a bit, John, I think you can find the tweet down here. Go down a bit further. There we go. Yes, until we get a vaccine, our only real tools are behavioral. We have to think through the lens of behavioral science. What can we do to nudge and encourage and cajole people and motivate people to do the right thing?
Now, the use of the word nudge there is very, very interesting, because nudge is an entire discipline in behavioral science about how to persuade people to manipulate them, essentially.
Yes.
I have an article series which should be coming out soon about this entire topic.
Yep, he's talking about the explicit aim of manipulating people there. In a Nature article in 2020, Van Bavel also posited that insights from the social and behavioral scientists can be used to help align human behavior with the recommendations of epidemiologists and public health experts. What is this if not an attempt to push people to do what they're told? And I think that I agree with them there, that there is certainly a seemingly concerted effort to try and align human behavior with what the elites are after. And it's brainwashing, and the fact checkers are getting their information from this guy, who's saying that the exact phenomenon that he is encouraging doesn't exist and there's no evidence for it, except for your own tweets.
Does sound like he and Goebbels are in good company, doesn't it?
Well, there's if you'd like to scroll down a little bit here, you can also see a horrifying feature of cult psychology. Go back up, jump just a little bit to where we were, back down just a little bit. There we go. You can see here that a September 30th tweet from Mr. Van Bavel in 2021 is a quote from a particular, I think you could call him influential propagandist in the early 20th and mid-20th century. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. Joseph Goebbels. So the fact-checkers are fact-checking the idea of mass formation psychosis by quoting a man who seems to be taking all of his cues from Joseph Goebbels. I think that says it all. There's not really much else we can go after. There's not very many places we can go now that we've quoted Goebbels, so I think that's enough for that segment.
If you want to see more from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to enjoy all of the premium content we have on the site, such as this premium article by Hugo examining how ordinary people can resist lockdowns. If you prefer to listen to our articles rather than read, we have an audio track recorded by our external reader, John Crow, available to Silver Tier members. You can get access to all of our premium content with a Bronze Tier membership for just £5 a month. If you'd like to stay up to date with all of the content we're putting out on the site, you can also follow Lotus Eaters on Getter at getter.com, and you can follow our individual writers and presenters, such as Callum here. Thank you, and goodbye.